Shame is the most destructive emotion we have because unlike guilt, which says I did bad, shame says I am bad. Shame is about the self, not about an action, which is what guilt is about. Shame makes us want to hide ourselves from others. And unfortunately, shame can come alongside trauma and create a negative sense of self, which can spill into our relationships. So join us today as we uncover and learn how to heal from shame. Welcome to Trauma Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host. And as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the opening, there's a difference between shame and guilt, and I want to take a moment to distinguish between these two because they're important. I think oftentimes in movies, TV shows, and just the general culture, they often get them confused. People say they feel guilty when actually what they feel is shame. And so, as I mentioned, shame is always about the self. It's about our badness. Guilt is about the behavior, our words or behaviors, and how we've wronged somebody else. So guilt usually is about the behavior we've done, how we've hurt somebody, whereas shame is about ourselves. It's about how we are bad or we are wrong as who we are. So, for example, if I have an affair, then I feel guilty because I've acted in a way that has hurt somebody that I'm supposed to care about. Now, I might also feel shame because now I see myself as a bad person. So both could be completely appropriate, but there is a difference. And the difference often is in the way it moves us. Guilt moves us to right or wrong. It moves us towards somebody to fix or make things better, or at least it should. But shame doesn't do that. Shame doesn't move us towards others. Shame pulls us away from others. It makes us want to hide ourselves. It makes us want to not be seen by others and to pull away. So some real fundamental differences there between guilt and shame that I think are really important to distinguish between. So let's talk about the ways shame can get embedded in trauma, because this is really important. One of the things we know about attachment and complex trauma is that oftentimes it creates a negative self-concept. We can call it low self-esteem, although clinically I distinguish that a little bit differently than I do shame, but it often feels like we feel bad about ourselves, and certainly that would look like low self-esteem. But I want to outline here 4 different ways that shame can be tied up with trauma that we encounter. The first one is self-blame. So survivors often blame themselves for the traumatic event, believing that they could have prevented it or handled it differently. So oftentimes survivors will carry shame with them, thinking that, well, if I had done something different, if I had just run away, if I have screamed, then maybe I could have prevented it. If I had taken a left turn instead of a right, not been in that situation. If I had told somebody else, then maybe my mother, my father would not have continued to abuse me. They think they oftentimes have more control over the situation than they actually do. And so they blame themselves as opposed to placing the blame squarely where it belongs, which is on the abuser, on the other person. Another way that shame can get wound up in our traumas is with violations of personal boundaries. So traumatic experiences, it can violate a person's sense of self and their personal boundaries, and it can lead them to feel shame and embarrassment. I shouldn't have let that person go that far. I shouldn't have let that person do that. That was crossing a boundary, and I felt it was wrong, but I froze in the moment and didn't know what to do. And so oftentimes, again, we can sort of blame ourselves because there was a boundary that was crossed and we feel like we should have done something about it and we didn't. A third way shame can get bound up in trauma is through secrecy and isolation. Shame breeds in isolation, and it can lead to secrecy. And individuals may fear judgment or rejection from others. So oftentimes with shame, as I said, we want to hide. We want to shrink away. We don't dare mention what we're thinking or feeling or what we really feel like is our true, authentic self because we're so scared of the judgment and the rejection it might cause. This can take on all kinds of different appearances, everything from a gay or lesbian man or woman scared to come out because even though authentically they might be attracted to someone of the same sex, they could not bear the shame or embarrassment of coming out. It can be, through sexual abuse as a child and not saying anything to relatives or to a mother or father that an uncle or an aunt or somebody violated them or a cousin because of the shame and rejection and the secrecy. And so what happens is that shame grows and it lives and breathes inside that person because it's done so in secrecy. When you shine a light on shame, it shrinks. It begins to go away, especially if you can find people that believe you, that trust you, that support you, that take you seriously. Because then it feels like something that you have felt is known and can be known to another human being. It's not weird, it's not strange, it's not unknowable, and it's not something that you should be ashamed of. So the fourth and final way that shame gets bound up in our trauma is through loss of control. So trauma can leave individuals feeling powerless and out of control. And of course, that can lead to feelings of shame and inadequacy as well. I should have been more in control. I should have been able to, again, prevent this. I should have been able to assert myself and stop that somehow. And oftentimes traumas can move so quickly, can be so bewildering that we go into fight or flight or freeze. And sometimes we just don't have the capabilities of processing in the moment a different way of reacting. I think it's also really important to say here that oftentimes our body responds to trauma in ways that we may not always like. But it's doing that because it's trying to find the best way to protect us and to survive in that moment. If we freeze up in the moment and then later feel shame that we didn't act more assertively or didn't stop it or speak out or say something, it's in part because our body was trying to protect us. It was doing what it knew to do. If it felt like there was no ability to fight or flight, to run away or fight back, then it freezes up. And that is a genius response from our central nervous system. It is ingenious the way it has another route that it can help us survive in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Okay, with all that being said, I think we've got a good grasp of the difference between shame and guilt, and the ways that shame can get bound up in our relational traumas. Now what I want to talk about is how do we begin to heal that shame? And first of all, it's not a light switch. We don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm not going to be ashamed anymore. I'm not going to feel shame. I'm not going to feel bad at the core of myself anymore. It is a process. But to begin that process, there's some things I think we can really do. So I've got some outlines here of some things, and you just pick and choose what feels like is the best approach for you. This is not meant to re-traumatize you in any way. This is meant to figure out and help you take baby steps toward beginning to heal that shame. So the first one is to be able to recognize and acknowledge your shame. So what does it feel like in your body when you go into that place where you feel ashamed? One of the ways you can begin to notice that is oftentimes when people feel ashamed, they will divert their eyes from other people. They will look down oftentimes. and they want to stop the gaze of the other person. So they're trying to hide, they're trying to shrink down. So identify, what does that feel like in my body? Oftentimes it can feel like there's a huge spotlight on you, or that you're being really exposed, like you're standing naked in a room and everybody's staring at you. That kind of feeling where you feel extremely exposed, like everybody's just seeing right through you. When you have that kind of feeling and that kind of shame, recognize it for what it is. Oh, I know what this is. This is my shame coming over me right now. Recognize what might have triggered that shame. That's hugely important. Was there a look on somebody else's face that you interpreted that made it seem like they were judging or critiquing you? Was it a thought that you had in a moment about something that you wished hadn't happened in the past? And all of a sudden, shame became overwhelming for you. So identifying what that trigger was is really important, as well as also how your body responds to that. And then lastly, don't judge the shame yourself. You're already worried about other people judging it enough. Don't judge it yourself. Let yourself move through that feeling. Tell yourself, okay, I'm feeling shame right now. I know what this is. I know where this comes from. I know the related meanings that I feel like it's my fault. I should have done more. I'm defective in some way. And I know this feeling is going to pass as well. So let yourself ride through that feeling, because just like all feelings, they rise and they hit a peak, and then they subside and they begin to diminish. So let yourself ride that wave of shame so that you don't actually get stuck in it. Something else you can do, practice self-compassion. This is huge for people that have had shame and are struggling with shame out of their traumas. So you've got to be able to have some phrases you can say to yourself that are compassionate phrases. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. It's all right. You'll get through this. Your body was trying to protect you. It was trying to do what it knew to do to keep you safe and to get you through that horrible event or series of events. It's not your fault that you didn't get the things you needed from your parents. They were doing the best they could, but they had limited resources themselves. You've grown so much since then. You've worked on yourself so hard. You're going to continue to do so in the future. So talk back to that shame at times, but do so in a very compassionate way. And then, of course, you can challenge your negative beliefs as well. So replace those critical thoughts with more positive affirmations like the ones I was just talking about. Right now, in this moment, I saw the look on that person's face and it threw me into shame. Do I have any data? Do I have any proof that that person was actually judging me in that moment? Or could this be just my interpretation and my wound coming up for me? Because oftentimes we can read into other people's faces or their words and think they mean something that they don't mean, and it throws us into a place of shame. And what's happened is that wound has just reemerged for us, but it's only come from within us. It didn't come from outside of us per se. Obviously, engaging in self-care. So you need to be able to prioritize your needs. What boundaries can you set for yourself? If you feel really frozen in large crowds and it's triggering for you, then find a way not to be in large crowds. Maybe don't go to that festival that has 100,000 people there where you're going to feel overwhelmed and constantly triggered. Maybe miss your family gathering for an event because you know it's a triggering event for you. Maybe don't go visit your mom and dad as often or call them as often. Don't put yourself into a situation where you can get triggered over and over and over. It's okay to be able to set boundaries. Another thing that's really important is being able to build healthy relationships, being able to attract and surround yourself with other healthy people, people that lift you up, that build up your self-esteem, that don't judge you, that are compassionate towards you. This is one of the best ways to overcome shame, is when you recognize that it was caused by people that themselves probably were swimming in their own shame, that themselves to learn how to deal with their own shame in very harmful and destructive ways. And so you can attract people that actually value you and value your worth and communicate that to you and lift you up and build you up. So find ways to attract people that can help you and that you can set healthy boundaries with as well. And then finally, let me say, in terms of healing our wounds of shame, is practicing mindfulness. So spending time every day, getting centered in your body, connecting your mind with your body, learning your triggers, learning how to create compassionate self-talk. These are really important things to practice on a daily basis in order to be able to be aware of the shame when it happens without swimming in it. It's one thing for us to understand how and when we get triggered. It's another thing for us to be so overtaken by it that we end up just swimming in the pool of shame, as opposed to standing by the pool going, yes, I see what that is. I've got enough of a working distance from it that I can work my way out of this right now, as opposed to being so immersed in it in itself. So I hope this was helpful today. As always, I really appreciate you listening. Please continue to give me feedback. I love to hear what you guys want to hear more of, and I'll customize and tailor these podcasts as much as possible. So take what you can from this. Take what's important to you, discard the rest, make it your own, and we'll continue to bring these to you week after week as we continue to help you and your relationships overcome trauma. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.